We are going to be in Ezra chapter 3. And as y'all well know, how far we get today, I have no clue, because it depends on how much you talk and how much I get distracted. But we're going to start at least in Ezra chapter 3. The goal is to get through chapter 4. Who knows? Glad everyone's here. Come on in. There it is. Okay. Ezra chapter 3. We're going to begin in just a moment, but first Gordon's going to lead us in a word of prayer.
Our gracious and loving Heavenly Father, we're so very grateful for this day and the many blessings you've given us, our home, for our health, for this country we have to live in where we can worship you in freedom. So God, we ask that you be with us as we study your word and help each of us to write it on our hearts, live it in our lives. So God, we ask to be with those who are hurting, need help. Help us to see that opportunity. Forgive us when we fail. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay. I'll come right on in. In chapter 2, we had kind of had them finally arriving, and they got home, essentially. Chapter 3, we're going to see them start some construction. At the beginning of chapter 3, it says, in the 7th month, and when the 7th month had come, the children of Israel were in the cities, people gathered together as one man to Jerusalem. So they gathered in Jerusalem. Notice it is the 7th month. The Jewish calendar, that puts it about somewhere around September, October, our calendar. How long they have actually been there? One commentator said about 3 months. Not 100% sure, but not too terribly long. Okay? So, they're there. Now they're going to try to begin some things. Notice in verse 2, they get started pretty quickly with the building of the altar. And Jeshua, son of Jozadak, and his brethren, priest, and Zerubbabel, the son of Sheltiah. Okay, but you know if I mess it up, just keep on going. And his brethren arose and built the altar of the God of Israel to offer burnt offerings on it, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. So, they didn't waste too much time, did they? Thinking about the trip they've made, and, they're trying to get settled in and so forth. They build the altar. Why did they build the altar?
For them, that was the most important.
Yeah, why was it the most important, Rex?
To worship God.
Without the altar, they couldn't make sacrifices. And without sacrifices, that's what their belief in God was kind of centered around, was these sacrifices to God. So they built the altar. And here's a good point to make. Notice it says, as it is written in the law of Moses. Here's why I emphasize the as it is written. What does that mean about the law of Moses at this time?
They prescribed how to build the ark.
Pardon?
He prescribed how to build the ark.
Right? But it meant also that it was what? Written down. Now that's what Ezra has been credited for, to putting all this information back down that they had lost at some time. They went to Babylonian captivity and so forth. Ezra is credited to have gathered this information back again and put it all back together. Now, some of it had been lost. So, they had a written word they could go to and read. This wasn't just simply oral traditions. So it was written down. And like Rex pointed out, it had specific instructions of how they were supposed to worship.
And that's what Cyrus the king actually wanted when he sent them back to worship their God.
Yes. All right, then look at verse 3. Remember, they built the altar, and they're going to begin making sacrifices. But notice what happens in verse 3. No fear had come upon them because of the people of these countries. They set the altar on its base. They offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord, both morning and evening burnt offerings. Okay. It says, despite the fear. Why were they afraid of the people around? Now, these were the people that once they moved there, see, it wasn't an empty land that they went back to. There were people that were still living nearby. So who were these people that were living nearby? That's the question.
Some of the people they had conquered before.
Some of the people they had conquered before. Who else were they?
Some of their own people left behind.
Some of their own people left behind. And why were they left behind?
To take care of the place and money. And
Okay.
the king saw fit.
There's another reason they were left behind. These were some of those that had married into the heathen people that were in that area. Remember when they came into Canaan? What were they instructed to do? When they first came into Canaan, what were they supposed to do? Wipe them all out, did they? No, they didn't. So the ones that are still there are some of the ones who had married with the Jews, the Israelites, and for some reason, there are various other ideas of why they were left behind, but they're still living there. We're going to see a lot about them shortly. But they feared them. But they went ahead and made the sacrifices and so forth, built the altar anyway. We're going to talk more about that later. And look at verses 4 through 7. They also kept the feast of the tabernacles, as it is written, and offered the daily burnt offerings in the number required by ordinance. And you can read on down through there. It wasn't just simply the idea of setting up the altar and getting started. They went back to what was written and followed the law. You offer the offerings that were made for the feast days. They started the feast days again. From what I understand, they weren't doing that while they were in captivity that much, if any. But they've started that all back again. They are getting their religion back again and worshiping God like they're supposed to. Now, look at verse 7. Okay, there we go. They also gave money to the masons and carpenters, and food, drink, and oil to the people of Sidon and Tyre, to bring cedar logs from Lebanon to the sea, to Joppa, according to the permission which they had from Cyrus, king of Persia. Why did they need the cedars of Lebanon? Start the building of the temple. The interesting thing is, where did they get what was the construction materials that they used in the original temple? And where did it come from? Cedars of Lebanon. Same came from the same place. Now remember, this is 70 years after they have been captured. Even longer than that, since the temple was originally, the original temple was built. But they're going back to the same place to get the cedars of Lebanon for their new temple. Okay? Now, just to give you kind of a rough idea, I'll get my trusty little pointer to work this morning. Okay. On the little map over here. Yeah, there we go. It actually is working. It wasn't working last night. So. Here's Lebanon. There's Sidon. There's Tyre. You might wonder, well, where is that compared to what's going on over here? Well, over here, by the way, where are they right now? Where did they go back to? Jerusalem. Okay, make sure we all know. So there's Jerusalem right there. There's Tyre, which you can see it over there. Come on. Yeah, this thing may last, it may not. Looks like it's not. Okay. It quit working on me last night when I tested it. All right, so here's Tyre. Sidon's just a little bit north of that. This area right in through here is Lebanon. So that's where the cedars came from. I did using the little scale down here. From Jerusalem to this area in here, as the crow flies, as they say, it's about 200 miles. Now, do they have good roads there? They had 18-wheelers to haul them? No. We're going to see where that's going to come into play a little bit later. We're going to see something. But it took time. Lots of time to get these transported from this area down to where they're building the temple in Jerusalem.
So they went and floated him?
They may have.
On the waters?
They may have. That may be exactly what they did. They may have just put them in and floated them down, but even then, they still got to get them across land here. But that's probably, my guess is that's exactly what they did do.
Well, it says in verse 7, break sea rocks of Lebanon to the sea.
Yeah, so they more than likely did float from that.
Right, probably floated on there.
But it still would have taken them a while to do that.
It wouldn't have been an easy job.
No matter how you look at it. We're not talking about an easy job here at all.
That's what they did when they built the first temple, was floated them
Yeah.
down there.
Now, while we're here on this map, I wanted to just real quickly talk about something. Here's Jerusalem. And the area that before they were captured by Babylon was a fairly small area, comparatively speaking, that was the promised land where they were living. Because remember, Lebanon isn't part of Israel. So here, what you see this color right through here, that's the area that when Babylon captured them, that's the territory that Babylon ruled over. And so they're living in Babylon for how long? For they were 70 years. Now, where they were actually taken from, they were taken from Jerusalem to the land of Babylon. Now, exactly where, I'm not 100% sure. But they were in that area. Now, who's in control? Who captured Babylon? Persia. Well, I'm going to show you even a better map a little bit later, and hopefully if I get there. All of this up here, that's Persia. Persia just size-wise, was so much bigger that, you'll see a little later when I show you the other map, that there was not much of a contest between Persia and Babylon when Babylon was overtaken by Persia.
What was Riblah?
Pardon?
Riblah. They took what? Okay,
Oh.
I see it.
Yeah, it's right
I
there.
didn't see it.
Okay, I just wanted to that kind of gives you kind of a feeling for the territory. Anyway. All right. So they paid their workers and they got their supplies ordered from Tyre and Sidon. That brings us then to verse 8. Now, in the second month of the second year. So now we've got some idea about at least what month in the year that we're talking about. They're coming to the house of God at Jerusalem. Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, and the rest of their brethren, and the priests and the Levites, and all those who had come out of captivity to Jerusalem, began work and appointed the Levites from 20 years old and above to oversee the work in the house of the Lord. So, this turns out to be approximately 6 months later. So, I showed you the map before this to give you because of this. From the time they built the altar to the time they actually start building on the foundation, about 6 months has passed. So when you saw the map, does that give you an idea of why it would have taken 6 months before they got started? It'd take a while to get all that stuff there. So some will say, well, wait a minute. Why did they wait 6 months before they started on the foundation of the tabernacle? Well, they had to get their stuff. So they got it ordered. It takes a while to get there.
It's about like ordering today.
Unfortunately, sometimes, yeah, it's about like ordering today. Especially during the pandemic, it was. Anyway, so we're talking about approximately 6 months later. Okay? And they begin to lay the foundation. Look at verse 10. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple, priests stood in their apparel and with trumpets, and the Levites, son of Haspah, with cymbals to praise the Lord according to the ordinance of David, king of Israel. And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord. It goes on and gives what they were praising. So, they laid the foundation. They basically had a celebration, didn't they? So do you think was everybody happy? Apparently some were, but not everybody. We're going to see in this moment. Not everybody was really happy. They had a huge celebration with singing and apparently dancing and with music. I mean, they had a big deal. But some had a different reaction. Look at verse 12. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of the fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first temple, wept with a loud voice when the foundation of the temple was laid before their eyes. Yet they shouted aloud for joy, so that people could not discern the noise of the shout of joy from the noise of the weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud shout, and the sound was heard afar off. Okay, so now you've got This group over here that's shouting for joy because of all the things that have taken place. They've laid the temple finally. They feel great. And then you got that group of the older ones. They're weeping so loud that you can't tell the difference between the ones that are weeping and the ones that are shouting for joy. Here's the question. Why were the older ones weeping?
They needed to see something with their physical eye bones there, so to speak.
Well, they had just laid the temple with the
Big or
foundation
small,
of the temple,
is
so
the
they'd
Lord
started
big
something.
or small, or both?
Pardon?
Is the Lord big or small,
Okay.
or both?
Well, he's, I guess, both.
I would think would miss the glory and the splendor of David's temple.
They had
This
Solomon's
one
temple,
was
yeah.
gonna turn out kind of plain looking.
That's it exactly.
Probably modest.
They had
Like old
seen.
people today, it ain't like it used to.
It ain't like it used to be. They had seen Solomon's temple, and that's what they were hoping to build back. So, from what we can gather here, is that what they built back? No. It was small. More than likely, from what they could see so far, was going to be. All they got now is a foundation, but it wasn't going to be near the glorious temple that Solomon had built.
Maybe the younger bunch saw a different temple.
Well, remember the younger bunch probably had never seen the original
They were
temple.
drove to repentance.
Yeah, but the younger bunch had never seen the original temple. So, because they hadn't seen it, this is all they knew. But the older ones, they were very familiar with the original temple. And they were just saddened because this just is not going to compare to that original. Okay. All right.
The young ones didn't need earthly treasures that don't seem like quite as much as the older ones.
Possibly. All right. Questions so far before I make a real quick application like I did last week? Okay. First one. Was there issues at the beginning to get started with their worship again? They had to build the altar. Okay. And there were the ones that were living in that area that they were afraid of. It says they did it despite the fear. But they what? They worshiped no matter what. How can we apply that to us?
That's what we got to do.
What you got to do?
We got no choice.
Are there situations sometimes when going to worship is not convenient, but you go anyway? Yeah. See, sometimes it's not convenient. Sometimes in some countries, thankfully not so far in this one, what could it cost you to go worship? Could cost you your life. But they worship anyway. And that's what they were doing. They did what was needed to be able to begin worshiping God again. They built a foundation. It wasn't as big as the one that some of them were familiar with from Solomon's temple.
Are you sure it wasn't as big?
I'm pretty sure from what I've read that it wasn't quite as big, or at least wasn't as what's left.
The temple dimensions were set.
But also remember, Cyrus gave them how big it should be. So I'm not 100% sure. I'll look a little bit closer on that.
Was nice dress.
It wasn't as nice, that's for sure.
I think there's a couple of things. They're crying, they're going to have some mixed emotions. They're glad it's happened.
Yes.
They probably don't have the gold and all. You can't tell. You look at a foundation, you don't see.
Right.
So there's a lot of things going on there. I think because Herod is going to upgrade it.
He is.
But that's more of a facade type
Mm-hmm.
cover.
Yep. So you may be correct that
Foundation, I think, was probably the right size.
it may be, but Cyrus had actually given how big it should be, which we'll see that later down the road. But it may have been the correct size, but it was obvious apparently to these older ones this wasn't going to look anything like what they were used to.
And, yeah.
Yeah.
Because there was some, I mean, there's no way they could get that much gold.
Yeah, right. So it may have been not necessarily size, but it may have just been what they could see was this was the beginning of what's not going to be
It's ornate.
as ornate and so forth that they were used to. That's correct.
And that,
Yep.
and like I said, where are all the pictures and everything
Yeah.
else?
Yep. So, okay, but they built it. Do we need a correct foundation to build our faith on? Yes, we do. Without a good foundation to build our faith on, well, it's like the idea of building it on the rock or building it on the sand, like the song goes. Yeah. If you don't build it on the right foundation, things get kind of wobbly pretty quick in a lot of ways. And change is hard. Those older ones that had seen the original temple, was the changes in the way it was looking right now hard for them? Oh yeah, it was hard. I mean, they were crying, weeping so loud that they were couldn't tell who was rejoicing and who was weeping.
It's probably more like wailing.
Yeah, it probably was more like what we think of wailing. But change is hard. Is change hard for us today? You move to a new community, start with a different congregation. Is change hard? It is. I know Trish and I have done that several times, not in our quest of getting around between college and jobs and so forth. And I think we're finally done moving. We better be.
We have to be alert to what changes face us.
Mm-hmm.
Just we passed 2 weeks ago, we saw our friends, I guess I could say Baptist church, not Presbyterians, I'm sorry, voted to accept things that we know are unscriptural. You know?
Yeah, I don't even want to jump on that bandwagon.
We see all kind of changes like
Yes.
that, and I'm sure we have brethren that would accept that too. I don't think we go as far.
No. But change in general is hard. And especially these older ones that he talks about, that were weeping and wailing, that's what they were seeing. There's change that they were not real happy with. Okay.
We're supposed to build our faith on eternal things, not so much physical things.
Well, that is correct. All right, chapter 4. If there's no other questions on chapter 3, that one was kind of short, so hopefully we'll be able to get through this one pretty quick. I really don't think so, considering I know what's going on, but so I don't think we're going to make it quite through as fast as we did that one. All right. Chapter 4 basically picks up where chapter 3 leaves off. And I mentioned that, you'll see in a moment why I mentioned it that way. And they're doing all this rejoicing and wailing and making an awful lot of racket. The last verse in chapter 3 mentioned the idea that it was pretty loud, wasn't it? According to that. Well, it shouldn't surprise us then that, beginning of chapter 4, verse 1, now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the descendants of the captivity were building the temple of the Lord God of Israel, and I'll stop there for the time being. So all of these that were living in that area, up to this point, we haven't heard anything whole lot about, except that they were the Israelites were in fear of them. They heard it. So they made a lot of noise on that celebration, didn't they? So their neighbors could hear. So the neighbors decide, let's go check this out. Let's see what's going on. Look at verse 2. They come to Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, let us build with you, for we seek your God as you do. And we have sacrificed to him since the days of king of Assyria, who brought us here. So what are they offering? They're offering help. Well, doesn't that sound good? Somebody comes up and says they're going to help you build this temple. Let's remember who these people are.
It sounds all right, but it's not all right.
Yeah, sounds pretty good, but not too good. It says they worship the same God. Is that true?
Among others.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you might say, yeah, it's kind of true, sort of.
It didn't really say they worship God, it just said they offer sacrifice.
Yeah, yeah. See, that's the part that they kind of leave out. It's like they basically treat the one true God as a God, not the God. Because they're worshiping a whole lot of others as well. A whole lot of gods. And they've got idols. And they've got all this other stuff that they're doing. So, just think about it for a minute. Do you think they really came to actually offer help?
They might have.
They might have.
They might have. But they would have polluted.
Yes, they would have. They would have.
Polluted the Israelites that were there, the Jews that
They
were
would.
there, and brought in their own, and that was.
Yep.
That was why they went to Babylon, is that they had accepted
Right.
all the other stuff too.
Exactly. So they've offered help, and it sounds like, okay, I could use all the help I could get. This is going to be a big project. But we're going to see what Zerubbabel says in the next verse.
Well, this would be limited to the Jews only building the temple, would it not? I mean, that would be God's wishes.
Yep. Okay, so they made their offer. Verse 3. Here's Zerubbabel's response to that offer. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses of Israel said to them, You may do nothing with us to build a house for our God, but we alone will build to the Lord God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us. We'll talk about that last little phrase in there in a moment. So basically, Zerubbabel's response is, no thanks. No, we got this. We're going to handle this ourselves. Just checking my notes here, make sure I don't get ahead of myself a little. Notice that they say, this is the end of verse 3, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us. Why do you think Zerubbabel added that phrase at the end?
We have permission.
We got permission. We're here with King Cyrus's blessing.
Not only permission, he got a command.
His command, yeah. So, this whole territory where they are is still under Persian rule.
means he doesn't have to explain anything else.
They basically said, we got permission and the supplies and we got everything we need from the king himself. We don't need you.
You know, he commanded the king of Persia. God did.
Yep. So Zerubbabel's answer, as I said a moment ago, was basically, no thank you. We got this.
But these people, they say that they have been in this country since the king of Assyria brought them there. Were they at one time captive?
No, these were some that Assyria was captured part of this area first. Then Babylon came along and captured Assyria. And there's always, one guy beats the other one.
Assyria would haul out people and bring other people in.
Yeah.
And leave some.
And leave some and so forth.
So they would mix in.
Yep.
And lose their identity.
Yeah, and that's basically what happened. These people had.
They didn't mind them worshiping their own gods, they didn't want to control anything.
Right.
Power.
Yeah. Syria let, as Persia ends up basically doing, later. Kind of the same idea. Babylon had a different aspect of that, or idea of that. Okay.
If Babylon couldn't care, they just hang him.
Yeah, they were done. Okay, so verses 4 and 5, we see what the people that Zerubbabel said no thank you basically said, or they basically didn't do it. This is their response. Notice verses 4 and 5. The people of the land tried to discourage the people of Judah. They troubled them in building and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And we're going to look at how long that was a little later, hopefully, if we get there. So, essentially, those so welcoming neighbors who wanted to help them build the building, when they said no, they did everything they could to stop them from building. They tried hard. Now, exactly what all of those things that it mentions here were that they did, we don't know 100%, of course, but it sounds like they went to doing just about whatever they could come up with. Even hired counselors to, I guess, try to counsel them into, this is a bad idea here. Discourage them.
That's about the only thing they could do. They couldn't go there with guns.
No, they couldn't do that because then they'd have all of Persia on them.
They sent a letter down there and told on them, didn't they?
We're going to get to that later. One of those letters in just a moment. Okay, so that's kind of where we are at this point. Now, here's where chapter 4 starts getting a little bit complicated. Verses 6 through 23. If you just read this straight through, trust me, and you look at the kings of Persia, it will drive you nuts trying to figure it out. Trying to figure out, well, how in the world? Here's what you got to remember, at least for this. This is not chronological. Essentially, what Ezra does in verses 6 through 23, he takes a break. And he tells you about some of the sufferings and some of the trials and things that they will go through later. Now, what we also got to remember that by the time Ezra is writing this, has this stuff already happened? Yes, he's writing it as history. This stuff has already happened. So, verses 6 through 23 is not written for the benefit of those Israelites that are living there. Whose benefit is it for? Us. It's for our benefit. What he's going to do in verses 6 through 23, and obviously a bell's already rung and it's not going to let me get very far. He's going to show you other things that they go through and problems that they had with these neighbors that were trying to get them to stop. So, just keep that in mind as we get there, and I'll get as far as I can with it.
And it all goes back, like you said earlier, because they didn't obey God and their commandments.
Exactly. Okay. Now I've got this chart in here to help us kind of understand the kings of Persia. We're going to see this chart more than once, but I'm going to start you off. Time period we're talking about right now is Cyrus. He's the one that's king at Persia at this time. 538 to 530 BC. Remember, in BC time, numbers go backwards. You know, that always messes me up, but it does, it goes backwards. We're talking about now, it's around 538 is when Cyrus took reign, and that's when the year he gave them permission to go back. The time we're talking about now is probably somewhere around 536, something like that. We don't know 100% for sure. Okay. This is Cyrus's son, who took over when Cyrus died. Then we got Darius I, Xerxes, Artaxerxes, and so forth. So these are other names we're going to see as we go along in this next part. Like I said, we'll come back to this chart. Okay, verse 6. In the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they, that is the people, the neighbors, were the disgruntled neighbors, wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. Okay, so they write to the king of Persia at this time. Now, this Ahasuerus is Xerxes. I'm going to show you the chart again here in a minute so we can know how much time has passed. We don't know much about that letter. Nothing's. We just know that they were written. They wrote a letter to Xerxes. Verse 7. In the days of Artaxerxes, also Bisham, Methandro, Tabal, and the rest of their companions wrote to Artaxerxes, king of Persia, and the letter was written in Aramaic. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit, and translated into the Aramaic language. Okay, so we got another letter that was sent to Artaxerxes. All right, let's go back to our chart. The time that we began chapter 4 was up here with Cyrus. And we're going to come back to that before the chapter's over. Obviously not before today's over. But we've jumped now down to here. That first letter was sent to Ahasuerus, Xerxes. And this is the time he reigned. So that first letter, it said that was sent to him, was sent this time. Wait just a moment. The second letter that we don't know a whole lot about either was sent to Artaxerxes. So now we're down to this time period. So we got a few years that's passed in here. We got quite a while that's passed. And all this time, here's what's going on. The neighbors are trying their best to get them to stop building the temple. So did this persecution, essentially, was it short term? No, not at all. And we're going to see next week, we don't know much about this first letter that he just mentioned, but we're going to come back next week with another letter that was written to Artaxerxes and what happens with it. Thank you for your time.